Hey everyone, it's Dylan from the Black Forest Wood Company, and we were commissioned by Moxie's to create a brand new communal dining table for their new restaurant in the northwest corner of Edmonton. This table is done using a slab of Hawaiian monkey pod, which is something that we don't typically get to work with that often. We did have a couple slabs of it in stock, and I think a few years ago we made a table for the city of Strathmore for their municipal building, and this slab actually happens to be the sister slab from the same tree as that table, and this time it's going to end up as a communal dining table like I said. The first step of the process here is to break the slab down into its rough pieces so it fits in the mold. These clients have opted for the river layout, so as opposed to leaving the slab intact and adding resin to the outside, which we would call a cast, we're doing the river where we cut it all the way down the center, and then we're going to rotate those live edges in to flip each other, and we're just going to play off that negative space that's created going down the middle of these two slabs. Once we've got the piece cut up, it's over to the CNC machine just to get the pieces flat and also remove all those rough sawn marks in preparation for the pour. If you left these slabs rough, you'd probably get a lot of your epoxy going underneath the slabs, which isn't really ideal, so we want to get these all cleaned up first. Now we are removing all the bark from the edges of these slabs, and that's in order to preserve a strong bond on these pieces. We got a question last week about why we don't leave the bark on, and while we'd love to, it is important to remove it to make sure these tables last. Once we've got the piece cut up, it's over to the CNC machine just to get the pieces flat and also remove all those rough sawn marks in preparation for the pour. If you left these slabs rough, you'd probably get a lot of your epoxy going underneath the slabs, which isn't really ideal, so we want to get these all cleaned up first. Now we are removing all the bark from the edges of these slabs, and that's in order to preserve a strong bond on these pieces. We got a question last week about why we don't leave the bark on, and while we'd love to, it is important to remove it to make sure these tables last. From there, we can get the slabs lifted upstairs and put into the mold. Here you can see that river layout that I was talking about earlier, so we get this really nice natural shape going down the center of the table created by those live edges. And now it's time to mix up for the first pour on this, and you can see that we're using nearly an entire bottle of pigment. That's because this client wants a completely opaque black base layer. The reasoning for this, well, there's two main reasons. Number one, it's going to hide all of the mounting plates for the steel base that's going under this table. Because this table is going in a restaurant, it has, I guess, an atypical base to what we usually do, and there's some extra mounting hardware on the top of these bases that wouldn't really look the best had you just done a clear pour for this. The second reason is that since we're only going part of the way up with this base layer, it's still going to maintain all of the beautiful edges of this monkey pod wood while still hiding that hardware like I mentioned. For this pour, we're using our Black Forest deep resins on the base layer and the top layer because it has a nice slow cure, which is going to allow for that resin to soak deep into the edges of the wood and form a very strong bond. Now that we've had that base layer cured, we can come along and pour a clear layer, again also using the Black Forest deep resins, and I think it's just about 1.5 inches remaining on these pieces, and that's just going to highlight that natural edge like I mentioned. Another thing that you may notice in these clips is that we've done absolutely no sealing of the edges to prepare for this, even in some of the decayed sections where the wood is much softer and more porous. This is because if you do seal your edges, in our experience, you prevent penetration into the edge of your wood, and ultimately you form a much weaker bond and something that could potentially separate over time. We've only ever had 2 tables separate in all of our time making them with resin. The first one, it's because we left the bark on, like I mentioned earlier, and the second one, we sealed the edge.
Elegant. I guess four of us might be able to do this.
No.
No. 2 more? 4 more.
2 more.
From there, after the pour is cured and demolded, it's back downstairs onto the CNC machine one more time to remove the top layer of resin that we've poured here. We get asked the question too why we pour this layer because it seems like a waste, and the reason for this is so that we can fill in all the cracks and voids in a single shot and just eliminate some of the fills that we're going to have to do afterwards. From there, once we've got the piece off the CNC machine, it's time to use our track saw to cut it down to its final size, and we do this in a couple steps just to ensure we get a nice clean cut and the blade doesn't pinch or burn. Then we can send the piece through our thickness sander just to remove all of those kind of burn marks and milling marks left from the CNC machine. You could, if you wanted to, just sand all these out with an orbital sander, but you'd probably spend many hours sitting there, and we like to use our thickness sander just to save on labor. And I know I've mentioned this a few times, but we're counting down the days till we can finally replace this machine. We have our brand new, over $300,000 thickness sander coming from SCM in, I believe, a couple weeks here now, and we're going to show the entire process of setting it up, troubleshooting it, seeing how it works. We're going to actually send these massive tables through, and it should allow us to do everything you're seeing here between the CNC machine and the sander in a single pass, which is going to save us huge amounts of labor. And then once the sanding has been completed, we can flip the table over to the underside and begin routing out for those leg pockets that I mentioned earlier. So as you can see, there's pockets nearly every 2 feet going underneath this table, so it wouldn't really look the best to have these black steel plates spanning across your river. So this is where that base layer really comes into play and allows us to get away with all of this. Now, that being said, even though we have a base layer, we still do our best to try and put our threaded inserts in the wood, and honestly, if we can avoid it, we never like to put them in the epoxy, because typically those base layers aren't quite thick enough to hide the whole threaded insert. They're just enough for us to do this 6mm deep recess for the plate. And then just to make the table a little more user-friendly and also add a nice aesthetic, we like to add these 2mm 45-degree bevels to all the outside corners. It just prevents that sharp feeling if you're leaning your arm against it, and also gives a nice line of definition on the outside of the table. And then finally, we're using some of our Black Forest Quick Fix epoxy to fill in any of those small imperfections that did get missed by that main pour. Even though we do the over pour, like I mentioned, as you can see, we do get pretty picky in what we want filled in. So sometimes after the flattening and sanding process, you can open up more of those small voids, but some of that Black Forest Quick Fix epoxy takes quick work of them. Once we've got the sanding, the fills, the pocketing all finished up, we can get this table lifted upstairs into the finishing area to begin applying our Black Forest furniture oil onto this piece. We had a long discussion with the client about the finish options for this, and the two that we offer primarily are our Black Forest furniture oil, which is a hard wax style finish, and then a 2-component acrylic urethane finish. This table, being that it's going in a restaurant, is going to be a decently high traffic table. It's probably going to get somewhat abused compared to, let's say, the typical dining table. Every customer at it isn't going to be picky about using coasters or placemats. They may even scratch it. They might put their keys up there. So there's damage that could end up happening to this piece. Now, the beauty of our Black Forest furniture oil finish that we're applying here is that it's very easily repaired in the space. So we could come up, let's say at the end of the night, at midnight, throw a coat of oil on, have it cured by the morning, and they could have patrons ready the next day for lunch to start using this table again. If we did a polyurethane finish, the time that elapses might be greater before this table needs maintenance, but when it ultimately does need its maintenance, there's a good chance that we have to remove this table from the restaurant, bring it back to our shop, respray it, and then re-deliver the table, all of which they're going to be weeks without a table in their restaurant. So for that reason, they've opted for the furniture oil with an addition of our Black Forest ceramic coating, which further enhances the durability of the piece and also makes it look quite a bit nicer too. From there, we can take the drive up to Edmonton and begin the delivery process for this table. So this is a brand new restaurant that's under construction here, and it still is an active construction site on the inside. We're going to have a few photos at the end of the video that was sent to us by the restaurant owner of this table in its finished setting. But the first step of our process is to get this piece lifted in and laid down so we can begin laying out where we're going to bolt these bases into the floor. The bases for this table wouldn't be stable without being mounted directly into the floor, but the client wanted them built this way, so there was lots of clearance underneath the table, and they could also get these custom footrests on there that they required.
Oh, don't let them slide and scratch if we can.
Once we've got the bases in, we can lay them out on the underside of the table, making sure they line up with all of our pockets. And from there, we can get them fastened down using the threaded inserts that I mentioned earlier. As you can see, we haven't put any holes in the plates or using inserts anywhere in the epoxy. We've primarily kept them located underneath the wood, so you're not going to be able to see any of those sticking through that resin. From there, it's all hands on deck to get this table flipped over and into location. We're just using some concrete anchors here to mount this piece into the floor, but the first step is to get everything laid out very, very precisely, because obviously this is the kind of thing where there's no going back. Once we've stuck the table down, we're not going to be moving it, so we don't want to be slightly out of square and just have one of those things that's going to bug the restaurant owner forever.
So the chain is this one?
Nope, just this side to mark it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then my jig.
Okay. One and Curtis and Kara are
Stay parallel.
Here, John's using this hammer drill to drill out all our anchors, and while it looks like a Makita, it's not. It's kind of some cheap knockoff brand that we found online. It was honestly just the cheapest one we could find because we don't do this kind of stuff very often, but it did end up doing the trick for us. Now, that being said, we maybe should have splurged a bit and got something nicer, because little did we know, we're going to have a bunch of jobs here coming up in the next few weeks that are also going to require this, that you guys are going to see in some future videos. While we finish up these final details here, let's take a recap on this table. The top is constructed from Hawaiian monkey pod that we sourced from GL Veneer, and we did a 2-stage pour using our Black Forest deep resins. We did a solid black base layer that we allowed to cure, and then we poured a clear top layer above that so that we could show off the beautiful live edge on this piece, but also hide all the mounting plates. The custom steel base was done by a local shop here in Calgary, and it's exactly what the restaurant owner wanted, as it's bolted directly into the floor but also allows for some nice footrests for all the patrons that are going to be sitting around this table. And like I mentioned earlier, you guys can go check this table out for yourselves. It's in the northwest corner of Edmonton, and make a reservation and ask to sit at the fancy Black Forest table.
30 what? Say that again. Oh yeah, because it is for higher up.
We're officially done our install here, so big thank you to Moxie's for this commission. This looks absolutely gorgeous in this space. Here's some of the photos that we got from the restaurant owner of the piece and the finished space, so let us know what you guys think of this piece in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.